telling me the webinar is being live streamed. That's good. Is that a good sign?
Yeah, that's got to be that's got to be a good sign. Got to be a good sign. Well, it looks like we have official liftoff. So it looks like we have official liftoff of our live stream. Welcome to our Navigating Now audience. For those joining through Zoom, for those joining through YouTube, thanks so much for being here. As a reminder, our Navigating Now platform is really a place for us to talk not just about what's happening as it relates to some of the uncertainty, around the pandemic and other things that are going on in the world, but just as we think about change being the new constant, and we think about the new hills that we're having to climb as leaders and the new obstacles that continue to be put in our way, we're continuing to find new ways and new exciting creative ways to deal with those. And we're just so thrilled to be able to bring a host of different perspectives and different leaders from different industries, different walks of life together to have these interesting conversations. As a reminder, we go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central at Thoutium.com/live. So again, thanks everyone for being here. Today, our conversation is with a leader who I very much respect, and I'll talk a little bit about the degrees of separation to our guest here, Peter Ruppert, in just a second. Today's conversation is really going to be centered around failing and scaling, with a little bit of a subtext around the lessons from a lifelong entrepreneur. So with that, what I'd like to do is welcome Peter Ruppert, the CEO of Fusion Education Group, to the conversation. Pete, so good to have you on the line with us.
Thank you, Grift. Pleasure to be here. What a nice little treat to be one-to-one with you for a little bit of time today. This is great.
Well, again, we're so excited to have you on. For those that are wondering how Pete got brought to the Thoughtium community, as much as I'd like to say it's just because he loves what we're doing, he loves what we're building, and he loves being a part of this community, there is that, and I'm sure Pete will say that. But he also is my uncle, so very, very happy to have him on here and talking with our community. Pete, what I want to start with before we even jump into Fusion is the topic around being an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of times, we as leaders, and particularly as those leaders who want to be part of small businesses and part of small teams that create a lot of change, it's also something we wonder, where does that come from? Where does that itch kind of start with? And I'm curious, Pete, from your perspective, where did that entrepreneurial itch first show up for you?
Well, I guess the entrepreneurial itch started with, as a kid growing up. I'm one of 6 kids, as you know, Griff, and one of the things that our father pounded in us was the importance of work. And early on, I realized that even cutting lawns and caddying in middle school, that doing something a little bit more entrepreneurial like that was certainly more rewarding than going to work for what was then $2.75 an hour minimum wage, like most of my friends. And so that kind of grew into a lawn mowing and lawn service business that I started with my brothers. My dad lent us the money to buy a riding lawnmower, and that was a big thing. And we built that business and had a lot of fun doing that. And then in college, I switched over and started a driveway blacktop sealing business that was again really fun. And it was all about realizing that there's what we have as a job, or we have some kind of a career or some kind of opportunity. And for me, it was the excitement about being an entrepreneur is betting on yourself. There's certainly a naivete around that says, oh, I'm going to certainly be successful, because what could possibly go wrong? And that's the Pete Ruppert at 18 and 22 that is a lot different than the Pete Ruppert today. But that naive belief that you can go do something and create something out of nothing is really powerful, I think, and was a big draw for me. And the other idea was this idea of creating something from nothing and betting on yourself to figure out what can you create out there? What could you possibly make out of something, from an idea to a true business, and to have no limits on what you could possibly do with your career, with a company you start, with some idea that you get rolling.
Yeah. I love the call out for naivete. Maybe we could reframe it as like the persistence of belief, right? In yourself and in the ideas that you bring. And I think, one of the things we always talk about is how to continue to show up with that persistence, even when, things aren't necessarily swinging in your favor. Well, Pete, one of the things I'd love to maybe follow up with is when you think about, folks really trying to get started when they're after some big idea or some big initiative. It doesn't have to be starting a company. It could just be pursuing a passion, inside a company or inside an organization. What is it for you that kind of helps you get that first step in motion? Because I think a lot of times people kind of really, really struggle to get their feet out of the cement when it comes to launching big ideas. What is it for you that lets you get into launch mode?
Well, I tell you, and that's, most ideas bang around in our heads forever until they get replaced by the next great idea that we have. And too many people, unfortunately, go through their whole life thinking about what if. And the last thing I want for anybody is to look back at in their 50s and 60s and 70s and say, I should have, would have, could have, or if I'd done this, I could have done this. And that looking back with regret is how no one wants to finish their 40 years of work or whatever it is they're doing. And I think the power of getting started really comes down to a couple of things for me. I talk about this in my book, but is that first and foremost, when someone tells me they want to get something started within their company, like you said, an entrepreneurial effort or an entrepreneurial effort where they're starting a business, whatever it is, it's all about, well, one, have you written it down? Because I believe nothing really comes to life until someone takes the effort to write that down on paper and establish it as a goal and as a vision. And the more detail you can put around it, the better off it's going to be. The second thing I ask is, well, who have you told about it? Right? Because again, we all have great ideas, but usually we're afraid to share them and we don't write them down. So like I said, they rattle around our head until it's replaced by the next great idea and we never get any action. So the first thing is have you written it down as a goal? Two, have you told someone about it who can help you and provide a little external accountability, because we all need that. And that champion or mentor can be a really important part of helping you get that started. And then the third thing is, what have you done to move forward, to get, once you write it down and talk to somebody else, what's the first sign of action that you've done? Have you gone and talked to your boss? Have you gotten your peers together who you work with? Or have you found venture capital people if it's an external idea to start a company? Whatever it is show me that first step, because the first step is always the hardest. And too many people don't want to get started. So if you do those three things, then I'm a believer that some person is well on their way.
Yeah, I love that. Simply, sometimes we just need to get it out of our head. And whether that's starting with the pen, starting with a conversation with someone you trust, or just trying to get that initial progress and not necessarily worrying about perfection. Such an easy recipe to say, but I feel like it's one of those things you have to continually show and practice, right? So that it does show up consistently.
Absolutely. And that's the whole mindset thing, is that we all have this positive and negative voice in our head that says, hey, you're really good, you can go do it. And that's the creative gene that gets us excited about the idea in our head. But then when the rubber meets the road, too often that negative voice says, well, no way you should try this. No way you should do this. You don't have the experience or the know-how, or you're not as qualified as the next person. And the reality is by taking those three actions I talked about earlier, is breaking free from that negativity that we all have in our heads to say, you know what, my positive voice is going to win over the negative voice to get this started. And from there, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. One of the things I think you've told me in the past is whether you can or you can't, the only way you'll never know is if you never do anything about it. And I feel like that mentality is just so powerful to have, specifically when you're trying to start or launch a new idea, but just in general, when you're trying to tackle, times like now, where it feels like just going through a workday can be a mountain to climb.
Yeah. And the quote I love about that is, I forget who said it, but it was, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right. It's so true.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of mindset that goes into it. And I think the mentality that you mentioned is something that hopefully a lot of folks who are listening in or passing by on this in a recording can relate to and can apply. Pete, I want to transition slightly to talk a little bit about your journey as it relates to persistence and getting through inflection points and standing back up. And would love to maybe go through the Cliff Notes version of some of the bigger moments in your career and how it's how you use some of those, whether really strong moments where you felt like things really went your way, or some of those inflection moments where it felt like things were crumbling. Can you walk us a little bit through that journey of yours?
Sure, absolutely. I'll there'll definitely be some highs and certainly some lows, but I think the real entrepreneurial thing I mentioned, when I started that driveway blacktop ceiling business, all of a sudden my buddy and I, who I partnered with on this, we borrowed the money from my dad to buy a pickup truck and all this equipment to do these driveways, and we'd seal driveways during the hot summers of Cincinnati with all that humidity and burn our skin and get the stuff all over us. And then we'd get it off. And then at night, I'd go knock on doors for an hour and a half almost every night and try and sell people on this idea that we could do their driveway. Well, once we kind of got rolling on that, I started to realize that, oh my gosh, it's really financially viable. And we quickly paid off the truck, and I was able to meet my financial demands that my parents had put on all of us to help pay for a significant part of our college, and then had extra money. So I realized, wow, this could be really, really profitable venture. So that's what really, really got me going on being an entrepreneur. Another big experience for me was when I was on an internship during my junior year of college. The guy I was working for was a Harvard Business School grad, and one day he was, as an intern, he took me on one of his sales calls to see one of their important customers. And in the car, he said to me, "Hey, have you ever thought about going to business school?" And I said, "No, not really. I've had a few friends who have talked about it, but I've never really done it. No one in my family's ever really gone to business school." And he said, "Well, not only that, have you ever thought about going to Harvard Business School?" And my chin probably dropped down and hit my leg sitting in the car, because I was a decent student, but wasn't as dedicated as I should have been. I was involved in a lot of things. And, I had my entrepreneurial venture, but he just kind of talked to me through about how he thought I was a viable candidate. And then if I worked hard, finishing my college career, and then did well in my early part of my career, I could position myself. And so I went home that night and set that as a goal, and then worked really hard in my first 3 years out of college and did really well, and then applied and just hoped. And sure enough, I got in. But I talk about that a lot, because that one conversation with that one mentor changed my life, raised the lid on my own expectations. And I think those kind of people who come in your life are just so important. But after business school, I got in the consulting business. I had started a consulting firm a few years later, and for 5 years we were kind of growing steadily, and we opened a couple of different offices in different cities, and then it all suddenly dried up. Our clients kind of canceled engagement with us. We didn't have enough backlog of new clients coming on board, and it really went from really doing well for 4 or 5 years to stagnating and then declining in about 6 months. And it was a horrible time for me. I was 33 years old. We were expecting our first child, and I was unemployed and working in the basement, just in my basement, unfinished basement in our tiny little house that we had bought, just trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. And a lot of my friends from business school and beyond were really starting to hit their cruise control on making great money and having great careers, and I was unemployed. I then went into the education business. Eventually, I was hired to run a startup charter school organization, and ran that for 8 years and had some success there. We grew from 4 to 51 schools during that time. And then I was recruited away. I thought, oh gosh, the grass is always greener. So I was recruited away to run a healthcare company, one of these too good to be true opportunities. And I jumped at this chance for this quote unquote huge, big opportunity, and got there. And within 3 months, I was fighting with the founder and the chairman, and we had completely been on different pages, and it was just a disaster. And it was 2 hours away from our house in Michigan, and I was driving back and forth a couple of nights a week, and listening to self-help tapes and inspiration tapes and anything I could do to try and figure out what I was going to do, because I'd realized I'd made a huge mistake. And then on first day back after New Year's, 6 months into the job, I had a particular blowout with the owner again. And I just walked into his offices and I said, listen, this isn't working for you, clearly. And it's not working for me either. And so we just agreed it was time for me to go. And so I went from this charter school organization that had gone really well to take this leap into the private school world and, into the healthcare world, and just have it fall apart like that. And so now I'm 43, we're expecting our fourth child at this point, and I'm unemployed again, and with no real prospects on what I was going to do. So I immediately start looking for a job. And after about 3 months of that, I had some things that were starting to come together, but I constantly was this urge to be an entrepreneur again. It kept pulling at me. And so I been working with some people and talking to some folks, and I could put together a little PowerPoint presentation. And there was some interest in me starting a private school organization, but it wasn't compelling yet. But I just felt like if I could really focus on this, maybe I could pull it off. And so I sat down with my wife, and at that point I was 43, I think, and she is the most risk-averse person I know, and so we're kind of counter opposites on that. And but we had a long conversation, and she kind of agreed with me. I kind of set it up that, hey, this is my year. I can always go get a job somewhere, but this is my chance to really go try and start the company I've not been able to do now for 8 or 10 years since I screwed up the last time. And we agreed that we would give myself the end of the year till the end of the year. So basically all of 2006. So I stopped the job search part and went all in to try and raise money to launch what's today Fusion Education Group that I still run. And right at the end of that year, right before Christmas, I was able to get the commitment from the private equity firms to back me and to help us start it out. So I started that company out in January of 2007. But again, if you don't have family, my wife, was extremely supportive, and she could have easily said, we have 4 kids, you don't have a job, we need to put income on the table to help us be able to live. And we ended up just betting, using our savings to kind of live day to day and reduce our expenses, and started the business. And lots of bumps and bruises early on, and today, fast forward 14 years, the company's done extremely well, and we have 80 campuses now across the country, and we're changing a lot of kids' lives and making a big impact with 2,500 employees that are just incredible folks dedicated to helping kids succeed. So it's been a journey with, you could hear some of those ups and downs along the way, and hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but that gives you a quick snapshot.
Well, and Peter, again, thanks so much for sharing that. Just for the folks who are listening in, if you'd like to ask Pete any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll definitely get to those. I want to get to the amazing things you and your team are building at Fusion, but a few things that I'd love to circle back that you mentioned. One being the power of having those voices in your life, right? Those people who are willing to help you take off your own lid and what you expect and what you think you can achieve. I think a lot of us, and those who are listening and just in general, we can probably agree that having strong mentors in our lives can be really, really impactful and frankly groundbreaking. One of the things I'd love to get your thought on is how do we as leaders show up more like that for the people who are coming up behind us? Because I think a lot of times it's easy to say, I can go out and how do I find mentors? But it feels to me that maybe we have a little bit of a dearth of folks who are being more proactive and trying to find the folks they can help. So would love to hear your thoughts on how we can be more that voice for the folks who are really trying to make a difference in their own careers.
Well, I think it's important that all of us who are in leadership positions understand the influence we have on the people that work for us, or the people that work in the organization who may not even be direct reports of us, but are in the organization. And I used to tell people, I've been saying this forever, is that people want to score touchdowns in their job. Every single one of us wants to score a touchdown, right? And as an old football player, you know that analogy, but everybody wants to be part of a winning team, and they want to feel like when they go to work, they're making a difference. and then they want to score more touchdowns or have an opportunity to be in a better position. And so, part of what I learned at Procter & Gamble, where I first started out of college, when I got to be that first entry-level manager, my boss sat me down and he said, okay, listen, here's how we think about leaders and what they do. Well, 50% of how you were evaluated was tied to how are your business results. And the other 50% was, what are you doing to groom the next generation of leaders behind you? And how are you developing your people and the folks that report to you? And, that stuck with me. I mean, P&G, as we all know, 150 years of outstanding excellence. They've had some bumps and bruises, but the fact that that company continues to this day, by and large, just to promote from within, it just talks about the culture they created and their focus on developing the next generation of leaders is really, really important. And so if we all think about that as our job, it's not just managing your team to get the results you need to meet your expectations in your job, but it's about what are you doing to help people think bigger about their careers, their future, and how to chase their dreams, because that's what gets people excited. And our HR VP here is often fond of saying, people don't leave their job for money or for pay. They leave their job because of their manager. And I think that's really important, is that we all know that we have such a huge ability to impact it, or maybe we don't even know. I think that's a young manager's mistake often, is they don't realize what they do and how they can impact the next level of folks that work for them.
Yeah, I think there's so much power in that. From what I've seen in my experience, I think people tend to sometimes over rely on incentives and structure. And I think what you're hitting really, really powerfully and tactically, and I think it's really a really nice point to hone in on, is the mindset of being a manager is just so important. And you give people the chance to see what they can make their careers into, whether it be in that organization or elsewhere. But if you buy into the mindset and your organization can align with the right structure, I mean, there's no limit to what teams of aspirational individuals can achieve.
That's exactly right. The same thing with kids, right? I mean, if we're going to kids and students, and we'll get into this, but it's all about helping kids understand and believe in themselves, right? And that's what our job as a leader is, to help create an environment where people can succeed and where they know that we've got their back to help them in every way possible to be successful. And if anybody has the good fortune of growing up in a family like that, like I was fortunate to, or you did, or grow up in an organization or have a mentor at school that helped bring them along through tough times, that's life-changing. And it's an important realization that we all need to realize, we all need to understand.
Yeah, I'd also just quickly be remiss for any of my old friends from my grow-up days that I watched a lot of touchdowns being scored. I didn't necessarily score a lot of touchdowns myself, so I do need to be honest that I wasn't necessarily the number one producer in that sense. But I did do a lot of the practice-oriented skills and activities that led to a lot of touchdowns being scored, enabling touchdowns, if you will. So Pete, one of the other things you mentioned in a little bit of your story was around watching others around you have success. And I think a big thing, going back to the title of our episode, Failing and Scaling, a big thing with failure, there are, dozens, if not hundreds of books out there with high esteem that talk about the power of failure and what it can have on your career. But I think there is this underlying subconscious nature of, yes, we know we can be wrong and we can have mistakes, but as we watch our peers next to us flourish while we have those moments of failure, it can almost incrementally make that feel more painful. And I know you mentioned that a little bit of kind of seeing some of your MBA friends kind of not zoom past you necessarily, but seeing some success when you weren't. And that can take a big mental toll on people. So I'm curious to get your thoughts when individuals are out there and they're saying, hey, it's nice. Everyone can say they believe in the power of failure. But as I watch my friends continue to update their LinkedIns with promotions and whatnot, how do you overcome that potential subconscious nature of seeing yourself fail while others succeed?
Well, this was some deep soul searching I had during those times when my friends were zooming past me, to use your term, and it's so true. But when I was struggling, I was doing a lot of research that eventually led to what I called my traits of a champion, which I had put together for myself to guide these guiding rules or steps that I used to help me along the way. But when I was struggling, I just decided that I wanted to see what other successful people have done, what made the difference for other successful people in all walks of life, right? Not just business folks, but athletics or actors and actresses and whatever it might be. And so what I realized when you peel back the onion on a successful person, it's so much different. Their life was so much different than what we typically think. And certainly what I thought at the time, when I was failing and struggling, I'd look at successful people and I would just say, well, they had all the breaks, they had all the skills, they had all the talents. And basically it was just a straight line to success. And we see successful people today and they're sitting on that pedestal and we just assume that they were always there. And it was just that straight line to the top. But in reality, what I learned is I studied some of these people and when you dig in, you realize the challenges and obstacles and number of failures they had along the way. That was hugely inspirational for me to help me pull myself up and say, you know what, this doesn't have to be the defining event in your life. You failed, okay? But it's not about what happened and how you failed, but it's what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do today to help rebuild and go chase your dreams again? And then as you read about failure, one of the things I love to talk about is failure is the greatest. I've learned more from the failures in my life than I have in anything else. And finally, I look at people who say, well, I've never really failed before. And the reality is those people who aren't failing are people who are never going to reach their potential, right? That not failing is like building a bunch of bumpers around us so that we protect ourselves from that negative feeling of failure. But there's no way we grow. There's no way we reach the next level and chase those aspirations we have unless we're willing to stretch ourselves a little bit. And when you stretch yourself, by definition, it's like a kid learning how to walk. You're getting into new ground. You've never done these things before, and you're going to fall a few times. But that's part of the process. That's what makes us stronger. That's what makes us better. That's where we learn the most. And as long as it's smart failure, where you're taking the right kind of risk, it's tremendously rewarding long term. But at the end of the day, for me, it was all realizing that successful people don't have that straight line to the top. They've had as many or much bigger failures than I've certainly had.
Yeah, I love that. We at Thoughtium use a similar analogy, but we like to say successful people tend to look like ducks on a pond, where it just looks like things are gliding when you look over the surface. But if you look under the surface, they're kicking pretty hard to get things going and to get the other side of the pond. So I definitely resonate. Pete, would love to transition to talk a little bit about Fusion Education Group, because I know you guys are doing a lot of amazing work there in the education space. First off, would love to just kind of hear how you got involved and how you found passion in that and how it's manifested to what Fusion is today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I first got introduced to education, and obviously my early background at P&G and consulting and business and entrepreneurial ventures was far from education. But I remember, again, the importance of goal setting here. But when I was in my last entrepreneurial finance class at Harvard, the professor asked us to get out a paper at the end of our second year and said, hey, I want you to write down 3 or 4 things that when you come back here for your 25th anniversary for your graduation, 25th reunion, you will have done. And so among things like starting a business and all this other stuff, I had written that I'd love to be successful enough so I could some way get involved in reforming education. Just that. And put it away and didn't look at it for a long time. But that writing goals down, so important to all of us. It's set in my mind, this back of this thing about education reform. So I would kind of keep an eye on it. And then all of a sudden, as fate had it, I had a chance to learn about this opportunity in the charter school industry. And the guy who started it, J.C. Huizinga, was the founder and chairman of National Heritage Academies, is what it's called today. He was looking for a business guy to run his education company because he felt like educators were stuck in the old paradigm of how schools have always been run, and he wanted somebody unique. And so that was my big break. I heard about that and I said, I'm such an I've become an education reform advocate. Wouldn't it be cool to be in a high growth business that was also doing really great things for kids? And so ultimately I was able to get the opportunity to run that as president and ran that for 8 years, like I'd mentioned earlier. fell in love with this idea of doing well and having an amazing service where you're literally having to help kids along the way. But along the way, I realized that what we were doing in the charter school industry was a lot like the way traditional schools have been run and always been run for 100 years, built for the industrial age. And, generally we group kids by age. So if you're 13 years old, we're putting you in 7th grade, damn it, whether you should be taking 8th or 9th or 10th grade level work, or if you're behind, you really should be getting 5th or 6th grade level. That's just the way we do it. It works for most kids, but it doesn't work for every kid. And so if you look at what we are doing and what education still continues to this day, you see this complete lack of personalization and customization. Whereas you look at almost every other industry has been transformed by customizing and personalizing the experience, the products all around the needs of their customers. But no, in education, we keep doing it the same way. And I really felt like when I raised the money, my premise was the future of education is going to be about personalization and customization, and whoever gets there first with school models is going to be the winner. And so that helped me raise the money and to start a private school organization. And then we started to look for models that we thought had that uniqueness, that personalization to it. And eventually found this tiny little school in San Diego, California called Fusion Academy, an amazing entrepreneur who had innovated and developed this concept by herself that effectively created every classroom was a one-to-one class, one teacher, one student, kind of the ultimate in personalization. And I had a chance to visit that school and meet with her. And it was just so incredible what they were doing. And it was a tiny little rundown strip center, a couple blocks from the beaches in Solana Beach, California. But within that 4 walls was magic. And she was working with kids who were falling through the cracks of the traditional schools. And what she was doing was transforming their lives. And we fell in love with it. And I told her that day, I said, Michelle, there need to be 50 of these around the country someday. And so we ended up partnering. We acquired that school from us, and she's still involved with us today, although more on a consulting basis. But we took that vision and what she's done and started to replicate it, improve upon it, and everything else. And that idea of creating schools around the needs of kids was the whole premise for what we tried to do. And so we've been rolling that out now across the country and even internationally now with our virtual school. And so we're able to provide kids, many times kids who have struggled in traditional schools and they're having academic challenges. They're not doing well academically. They're not special ed kids, but they often have social or emotional problems. They've been bullied. They've had gotten involved in the wrong crowd. They had some real problems at home, and that behavior came to school, and they were just at risk of dropping out or failing out or giving up or whatever it was. And those type of kids were immediately drawn to what we were offering, because we could, in a one-to-one environment, really get to know each kid and their hopes, their dreams, their fears, their aspirations, and work with them as mentors first and as teachers second. And you heard me talk about the importance of mentors and champions. Well, we built this into the school model, or Michelle did first, but we've continued to build on that. And so every classroom starts with teacher and student face to face. And the mentoring happens first, which builds that trust and that relationship, so that then we can personalize the instruction and eventually create life-changing results for students. And so, what's I think been most rewarding for all of us is that we're now doing this across 80 campuses, and our virtual schools serving kids in 17 or 18 different countries, as well as 37 states. And so every day it's exciting to know, though I don't do it personally, but the amazing teachers we have are changing kids' lives every day. And that compelling uniqueness of a personalized education model has really had some great power.
Yeah. So you told her 50, and it sounds like you undersold, and now you're at 80. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Well, who knew I'd be at this 14 years later,
Well, I think, Pete, it's a nice transition for us to talk a little bit about scale. And I would tell you, one of the things we see in our business, whether it's an organization trying to scale up, their own learning and development functions, or try to scale up their thought around the strategy that they want to create for an organization that's a lot larger than the one they currently have. I think what you mentioned is a little bit of this balance, and even going back to school, right? We're taught about the concept of economies of scale when you study business, and how creating uniform things in your process can create a much more efficient output. But the human experience, it needs to be personalized to have that impact. And I think I'd love to get your thoughts on when you looked at your business, plus when you just looked at the fact that what you're trying to reform towards is personalized education. How did you balance the need to scale certain aspects of the business, but not to lose sight of what needed to stay personalized?
Yeah, really great question. And, we knew that the power of our program was that individual activity in the classroom, right? It was that teacher as a mentor and understanding their kids and being able to deliver that personalized instruction. So we had to figure out, how do we scale this customized education in every classroom, right? So we're basically scaling mass customization today. And, we always knew we wanted to try and impact as many kids as we had, which means we had to scale as we could, and we had to scale and had to grow. And so, I think an organization that wants to scale, it starts with the leader and the leadership creating this vision that says, hey, at some point we want to be 20, in our case, 20 or 40 or 50 or 100 schools. And that was the vision we set out early on, even before we had acquired more than one. And we said, someday we want to have 100 schools across the country, changing kids' lives in a unique and customized way. And that was our vision statement. And it first takes that leader/leadership, making that big, bold vision that says, this is where we want to go, and get everybody enthused and excited around there. And then that should be driving the conversations you have as an organization to say, okay, we always used to talk in those early days when we had 4 or 5 or 8 schools. We'd say, okay, how are we going to do this when we have 50 schools, right? It kind of forces us to be thinking about getting there and preparing to be there before you get there. And that's the part of scaling that's so hard, is building the systems and the capabilities and the standards and that infrastructure ahead of getting there, so you're not falling apart because so much is loose when you get to the point of getting, in our case, to 50 schools and beyond. So, I think that the idea of the vision, and then always be talking about where we want to go, and selling it, right? I think any organization that's going to scale, it's a lot of hard work, and people better be excited about what you're scaling towards, or else they won't be on board, right? And so I think the CEO or the founder or like I said, the leadership team have to be on board with this idea that, hey, we're creating something special here. And it's here today, but it's going to be way up here in the future. And we need you to be a key partner in helping us figure out how to get there.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, and I think is so important, is setting the vision, making it ambitious, making sure the people that you're bringing into the company are excited about marching towards that vision. And not to jump into too many business cliches, but we always kind of hear this idea of building the plane while you're flying it. Maybe you don't need to build the plane, but you should at least have a little bit of the blueprint of what goes into the fuselage when you take off, so that you know what you're going to have to build when you're in flight, right?
For sure. In any growth company, growth organization, you're always building the plane while you're flying it. It's just part of the deal, and it's a challenge, because when you're growing quickly, you're always, as much as you're trying to be proactive, and I probably oversimplified it by saying you got to be way out in front, because sometimes you don't have the dollars to make those investments and things like that. So you're constantly trying to do that. But that's the failure mentality that we talked about earlier, right? Because when you're growing, you're failing a lot, hopefully making small failures, learning from them, and investing where you need to do to continue to prop up and build the infrastructure so you can scale successfully down the road.
Yeah. Pete, you bring up a really interesting point, which is a little bit of the dissonance that exists in the say-do ratio in a lot of organizations, both small and large, around the concept of accepting and learning from failure. And I think if you probably open up the values of any XYZ company right now, there's probably something in their corporate mantra around how they learn from failure, or how they accept it. But I at least from my experience and what I've heard anecdotally from a lot of folks, is that what's said on paper isn't always put into practice. When you have leaders who say hey, we we expect and we accept failure, but when it comes to atoning for it, they tend to like to pass the buck. How have you been able to set up either a culture within Fusion or just thinking about creating cultures that are learning from failure as opposed to shunning it? What goes into that?
Yeah, well, there's two types of failures I think I'd want to differentiate. There's failure from incompetence or not caring or not being willing to bring what it takes to be successful, right? And so not every failure is acceptable, right? You can't hire bad people, not let them, not hold them to performance standards, et cetera. And then be fine when we start missing business results just because we're not prepared, right? And oftentimes, I always say an organization is a reflection of the leader, right? Sometimes the people who might be failing are failing because the leader or the leadership team or whatever haven't built the infrastructure, haven't trained well, haven't provided the tools for people to be successful underneath them. But assuming you've done that, failure from incompetence or lack of caring or lack of grit or whatever, that's not acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. It's the failures that are acceptable is when we all agree that, hey, this is something new for us. We may not have the answers, and we're going to ask you or your team to go out and try and figure this out. And then we're going to learn and course correct along the way. And those are the failures that you have to happen as you are scaling your business or what have you. And so it is important to differentiate that, because failures is just not like, hey, whatever happens, happens. And that's not a lesson I think I'd ever want to promote. But that idea of smart failures, when you're pushing the envelope, when you're stretching yourself or your organization, that's really important. And like I said earlier, you can't hit a home run if you don't swing the bat, right? And so you have to be willing as an organization to allow people to swing the bat and try new things to help push you toward that future, that scaling dream that you have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. That even failure, not all failures are created equal, and
right.
To be really clear on where it's coming from. I think as organizations, we probably can be even more clear on and our expectations around that. Pete, I know this is a passion topic for you because you even went out and wrote a book related to failure and finding potential. What sort of called you to get into the author space from being a business leader for so many years?
That's great. I don't think I ever planned to be an author. I guess the inspiration came, and just to back up, I had mentioned earlier this traits of a champion list. When I studied other successful people, I saw these common themes. I created this list of 8 or 9 things that I jotted down on paper. And I kept it in my briefcase as an inspiration, as a guide for me as I was trying to pull myself back up. Then when my oldest son, Jack, who is now 25, when he entered middle school, so this is probably 12 or 13 years ago, I took that list, I titled it Traits of a Champion, I laminated it, and I put it on my kid's bathroom mirror. And I figured that they probably didn't want to listen to their old man talk about, hey, here's the keys to success in life, but they might read it while they brush their teeth, and seeing it there every day, it might sink in a little bit that way. And then I shared it at a leadership conference that we had at Fusion. Gosh, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago now. And I shared that list. And I had 2 or 3 people come up to me and said, that list is so powerful, you need to turn that into a book. So that's where the idea kind of came about. And I chewed on it for a while, and I eventually wrote it down as a goal, right? When you talk about the importance of writing things down and getting started, talked to a few people about it. And that's what led me to get it going. And the premise was, there are so many people out there who are struggling, trying to find their way, and have all kinds of potential, but sometimes we don't know where to get started or what to do or how to do it. And the idea was, if I could create a book that's 150 pages, simple, easy to read, you read it on an airplane flight, but in addition, that was the bringing to life these 9 steps that are so important to me, and I think to others, and include in there a bunch of other resources where they could dig deeper and make it kind of a workbook style format that people could jot down notes and kind of create their own life plan, et cetera, then that might resonate. And so that's what led me to head down this path. and get started on that, becoming an author a few years ago.
Yeah, well, first off, it's great to have an author on the show, an author in the family. Peter, what I love, and for those that are out there, the book, you should definitely pick it up, and we'll talk about where you can get it. It's called Limitless: The 9 Steps to Live Your Extraordinary Life. What I love about it is what you just mentioned. It's even calling back to your vision and what your purpose is around reforming and personalizing education. And you go through that book and you're getting these great insights. They're simple, they're concise, they're easy to grab onto. And then instantly you have a little bit of a workspace that you can personalize, that you can think about some of the things that you'd like to do, either with the information or what it's jostled loose in your head. And I think that format of not feeling like you had to keep it too esoteric, that it's just like, this manifesto that people need to follow, but you let people give the knowledge you have their own personal spin. I think there's so much power in that.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And that was certainly a part of it. I wanted to be something that, like I said, was short, but something you could refer back to time and time again, because success in life and in chasing our dreams is a journey, right? And there's ups and downs. And I talk a lot about my failures in the book. And I think that's what people have said has resonated with them, and that it's not like, as I said, the ideal of the successful person, where all they do is this is what I did, all these great things. And if you just do all these great things too, you'll be successful. Mine was really, hey, I've had this up and down journey, and ultimately it's worked out fine. But how could I transfer some of that knowledge to somebody else who's going to start their journey, and inevitably they're going to have some ups and downs, and know that that's part of the process. And like I said, that's been a big winning part from people who have given me feedback on the book. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The willingness to be super vulnerable, not just say that you've been through mistakes, but to name them. I think there's so much power in that. And I at least personally felt it pretty inspiring. So thanks for sharing your journey, and for letting other people be a part of it and make their own. Pete, I do want to jump into some lightning round questions for you. But before I do that, are there any questions you either have for me, or are there any things that you'd like to add based on our conversation so far? No, Grift, as you know, I have a tremendous amount of admiration for you and your journey, and there's some really cool things that you've done. So I loved how you've attacked life, and I just see too many younger folks who are trying to figure it out, and so they have this kind of analysis paralysis or this stagnation, and you've been proactive, and I think you've had this mindset to say, I'm going to make things happen. And so kudos to you on your journey so far, and the impact you're making at still such a young age is really cool. And I think you're inspiring so many people in your own way on making a life that's limitless. So congrats.
Well, thanks for that. And it's nice, again, to have the voices in your life that you look up to that continue to support you and take the lid off for you. So I won't name any names, but they come on your webinars from time to time. All right. So Pete, lightning round questions for you. First question. What is one thing you're really geeking out about right now? Whether it's a book you read, a podcast you listen to, something happening in your local newspaper. What are you geeking out right now about?
Gosh, let me chew on that but lightning round, the thing that I'm really geeking out about is this virtual school that we launched less than a year ago. And to think, from a standing start, to see how we're able to impact kids and with our virtual program is really powerful. But that relates, as I think more about your question, what I'm really geeking out about is I think what has the silver lining of COVID and this pandemic is forcing America's parents to become much better consumers of education. As parents saw their schools flip to virtual and see 30 kids in a class sitting on a Zoom classroom, and the frustrations that was, you've seen so many parents now start to think about other ways to help their kid through tutoring, through online resources, through online schools. And that's a really, really good thing, because in the old days, a parent would feel like they've done their job if they were able to move into a good school district and enroll their kid in the local school, and then in kindergarten, and 13 years later, check the student back out and say, okay, my kid's been highly educated and they're now out of high school and they're on to college or what have you. And that was kind of the big role back then. But now I think we've realized over the last 20 or 30 years that that doesn't work anymore. And COVID has really forced that to the fore, where making parents better consumers of education and ensuring their students, their children are getting the most customized, personalized programming they can get. It's just going to be a huge change. I think we'll see just more and more over the next 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. Oh man, that's powerful. I'm excited to see what comes, and I definitely am excited to have more conversations about it moving forward. Next question for you. So, like any good host, I did a little Googling, found a couple pictures, and I need to ask you a question about the picture I'm going to show you. The question is pretty simple. The question is this an actual billboard that exists out there? And if not, even if so, I'd love to know the context, either if this is a fake billboard or is it real?
It is a fake billboard. I was on a podcast recently, and as part of their front page or whatever on their website, they created this fake billboard. So gotta love it. I wish it was Fifth Avenue in New York or something, but unfortunately it's fake.
Well, that's the next step on your journey to education reform vocal. Is,
right, exactly.
We'll see that big billboard on not just Fifth Avenue, but blocks around the country. Pete, last lightning round question for you. What's one thing as a leader of a business, but just as a leader in general, that you know now that you didn't know 18 months ago?
18 months ago. One thing that I know that I didn't know 18 months ago. That's a stumper, but I'll have an answer. Give me a second. I think the one thing I know now that I didn't know 18 months ago, yeah, is the power of personal mindset and belief in oneself, and how even more important it is than I used to think. And if you think about what's going on in society, right? We've got this pandemic, we've got political and social upheaval, we've got economic concerns and economic issues that have happened, and people have lost their jobs, and I've really seen people react in one of two different ways. And one is, woe is me, right? And somebody needs to pick me up and support me and help me get through all this. And in certain instances, that's certainly the case. But others have used this as a launching pad to say, okay, I don't like the situation I'm in, but this is a great chance for me to course correct or to do something new, use this as a launching pad to go do new things. And, probably the opportunities now, despite all these challenges I just mentioned, are greater because there is all this disruption, there's all this turmoil, which creates opportunity for people who have that mindset to say, I'm going to go make something happen, is abundant. And to see how many people have responded in that way is really rewarding. And we have to find a way to have more people do that. But that's the key, I think.
Yeah. What a great way to end it. Well, not exactly end it. One final question for you. Limitless, the 9 steps to live your one extraordinary life. Where can folks go to learn more and to ultimately buy a copy for themselves?
Yeah. Well, the book is available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. You can just Google Limitless, Pete Ruppert. And you can also go to my website, which is peteruppert.com. And there is all kinds of information on the book and resources and additional work pages for people who return to the book time and time again. And a quick link right there that'll just take you to be able to order it. And I would say that, all the proceeds from this book are going to go to our scholarship foundation at Fusion. So I'm not just doing this to make money personally. Not that authors make money on books typically anyway, unless you're a national bestseller. But the idea is every dollar I can give back to kids who need a scholarship to Fusion is where all these dollars are going to go. So, but that's the easy way to find it. It's either on Amazon or at peteruppert.com.
All right. Well, there you have it. Well, Pete, Thanks so much for the time. I know you're a busy individual, giving us an hour. I know not just for myself, but for our company as well as for the broader community. There were at least 5, if not 6 or 7, really awesome nuggets to take out of this episode. So really appreciate you coming along, and I really appreciate having you indoctrinated into our Navigating Now community moving forward.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's been fun. So thanks to you, Grift, and thanks to Thoughtium for having me on the show. And I tell you what, you might have a second calling here as a interview host. The next Brian Gumbel.
There we go. Well, we'll see you along my journey of becoming that. Maybe I'll be better of face better for podcasting. We'll see.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Pete. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks, Griff.
All right. And just one last reminder here for everyone. Wanted to pop up Limitless 9 Steps to Launch Your One Extraordinary Life. Go to PeteRuppert.com or just go straight to Amazon or BarnesandNoble.com to get your copy. I promise it's going to be an impactful read and a good chance for you to workshop some conversations that are good to have for yourselves, and then to share that with someone you really trust. We are taking a week off. We're giving Navigating Now the Labor Day treatment, so there is going to be no Navigating Now next week. But coming back on Thursday, September 16th, we are going to have our beloved co-founders, Norm Ralph and Anthony Ewing, come together with our Chief of Staff, Amanda Miller, and we're going to be talking about the 5-year anniversary of this business, the story of Thoughtium, where we've come from, where we are, and importantly, where we're heading, in that vision that we're all really, really excited for. So thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode. We really appreciate you being a part of this community. I really appreciate you coming back when you can. Again, Navigating Now every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. We look forward to having you back.